So a district president, which your father was basically the state president there, because all of the branches were under the mission at that time. And where was I going with this?
You said brotherhood within the church causes.
The first counselor in the mission president was always a local Englishman. The second counselor was the equivalent of the traveling elder. He was a missionary like us, and he didn't spend time in the office. He traveled around working with all the missionaries.
Okay.
And when I got there, the second counselor missionary was a man named Clyde. Robert Clyde later became a regional representative.
Is that Doug Clyde's father? Did you say Clyde?
Clyde, yeah.
That was Bishop Clyde's father, wasn't it?
I think you're right.
Oh, you're kidding.
Yeah,
You're
it was
right.
Bishop Clyde's father, so he might have known your father too.
That's weird.
Anyway,
Yeah.
Elder Clyde's companion was a man named, a young fellow named Anderson. And they traveled, we all knew them. And Elder Anderson had this girlfriend, her name was Arlene. Arlene, everywhere. You've got to get the picture like that. It's a beautiful guy. Everybody all of the elders knew Arlene. Anyway, Elder Clyde was going home, of course, before Elder Anderson said, when you get to Salt Lake, you've got to call Arlene. And,
Oh, no.
and tell her about
You see it coming.
Oh, no.
Come on, do it, cousin. All right, cousin. So I got home, called up Arlene, they went out to dinner together. Next thing we know, we're all getting wedding announcements, they're getting married. And the interesting thing is that they stayed friends.
Really?
That's why I say that
Oh,
I
that's
works the
neat.
brotherhood of the gospel.
Oh, my
And
goodness.
that it was Doug Clyde's dad,
He was in the same mission.
yeah.
Yeah, I did
But
not
he
know
was
that.
leaving shortly after.
He just took the turf out from under his.
Oh my God.
Oh,
Funny.
Well, I know that you guys might not know this, but he told us that you're a patriarch, so I thought you wouldn't be too nervous having what you say recorded, because that happens a little bit anymore. But if I can just set the scene here, my dad started his mission in like November of, or maybe January. Let me take a look at for sure. Okay, January 8th, 1951. He went in the mission home, and you guys were together in a town called Wigan. And I noticed that was about kind of northwest of England, west of Manchester,
yes.
and north of Liverpool.
Yeah, in the Liverpool district, if you think of a triangle, Liverpool, Manchester, Birmingham.
Okay.
And by the way, that triangle is the most heavily populated part of the world.
Oh, is it
What?
really?
Really?
During World War II, the bombers used to come over and bomb Liverpool, Manchester, and Birmingham, and you could read the paper at night by the light of the burning cities.
Oh.
And there's a canal that links Manchester and Wigan, and they would follow that canal from Manchester down to Liverpool, and then down to Birmingham on the way back. Wigan is the closest English equivalent to Brooklyn. Comedians adopt a Wigan accent. Wigan is Lancashire. Hey, by boom, kind of stuff like this. When they want to do comedy routines,
Okay.
either a Cockney accent or a Wigan Lancashire accent. I don't know whether you know a very famous author, and I forget his name now, Animal Farm.
Oh yeah, I've read that.
Who's the author?
I
Anyway,
forgot his name.
wrote
I've read that.
a marvelous book on European socialism called The Road to Wigan Pier. Wigan Pier is legendary. In 1951, it was a dirty, scruffy Midland town. Remember, England had been at war since 1939 and the Depression prior to that. This was 1951. There had not been any reconstruction after the war. You had
Okay.
20 years of accumulated coal dust.
Oh.
Everything was, you heated with coal to the degree that you had heat. But anyway, and this was in the middle of the coal mining and cotton manufacturing area, so it's a mill town, really very, very ugly. So there's nothing romantic about this at all. Why did I get going on Wigan? Anyway, that was Wigan. Now when Elder Rockwood got there, I don't know where he had been prior to
He
that.
came from Southport, which would have been northern, right on the coast, and he came from south.
But he arrived, he was assigned to me, I was with my first companion, Elder Love. I had two Elder Loves, by the way, my first love and my second love.
Were they relatives?
related?
No, really.
That's interesting.
Anyway, we got together, as I say, we were only together about 2 months. But we were all convinced, all the elders in the district, that he was being groomed to become the district president. Because his leadership qualities were absolutely superb. But I must point out a couple of other things.
Here it comes.
There was in the Liverpool branch of the church what were known affectionately throughout all the mission as the Liverpool Girls. A group of about 15 or 20, all in their late teens, early 20s, kind of thing like this. And of course the dream of every young woman in British mission, I assume elsewhere, was to marry an American and come to the United States. The church had discouraged immigration for 50 years. It didn't take. They wanted to come to America. I went from Liverpool over to Ireland. We couldn't keep things going in Ireland because they joined the church and immigrated to the United States. Anyway, then Elder Rockwood hits Liverpool district. And the girls were in a flat spin. That's why I asked, did he marry finally somebody stateside? It would really just frost my shorts to find out he got hit. The Liverpool women, they were notorious. Anyway,
That's so funny.
obviously he resisted the
I guess
siren call and managed to get through. But they were, tall, broad-shouldered, personality plus, strikingly handsome and very effective missionary.
Well, he mentioned the girls a number of times in his, and I don't wonder if they all the wards had those where they would fix teas for you or food and stuff. So that was kind of funny. Were you already in Wigan when Dad came? Okay, so you had been there.
Yeah, I had been there 7 months. That was my first assignment. I had my first companion, Elder Gary Huxford. I was with him for 7 months. A wonderful, wonderful man. But it was so filthy dirty and all that. And he suffered from, what do you call them? Boils that turned into carbonates. All across the back of his neck. At night we would come in, and we'd bathe as best we could with a spit bath. And then I'd use the tweezers to pull these, cores out of the carbon. He would walk around all day with these coke push knives. He really suffered. And finally reached the point where they transferred him down to Southampton, in the extreme south of the more gentle climate. And Elder Rockwood came to take him.
Well, a couple things he said about, he was so impressed with Wigan because some of the things he said was, in particular, that it was nice going to a branch where he didn't feel like he had to do everything and had all the responsibilities. Evidently the branch was at least people were giving their talks and fulfilling their callings, and he hadn't been used to that evidently where he worked before. And he also mentioned some of the, not necessarily backbiting, but some of the stuff that was going on in the branch that he'd served in before Wigan, and he hadn't, and refers to that as too bad they're not like the branch here. He seemed to be very, very impressed with the area and the members of the church there.
They were good. It was good people. Does he ever mention anything about street meetings?
Oh, absolutely. There's some things I'm impressed with. Number one is it the number of meetings and the number of books. And back then they didn't place Book of Mormons, at least that's not the word you used. you let people borrow them, and then you would try to go back and collect them, and that was some.
Yeah,
Sometimes.
I didn't understand the word place. Yes, we tried to get a Book of Mormon in the house, but was with the understanding it was our book.
Right,
type thing.
right.
But that was our street presentation. We actually have knock on the door. We had, "Good morning, ma'am, we're missionaries in Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints." We go through this spiel, and we'd like to leave this book with you. Would that be all right? Make an appointment to drop back. 90% of the time, of course, you drop back and they give you back the book. But there was no such thing as member missionary work. You did it all on your own, and you tracked it from early morning to late night. Can't remember that we had a curfew that we were to be in by, because we were still out on the streets at 10 o'clock at night. I must tell you a story. It's one of my favorite stories. This took place in Ireland, but it could very well have taken place in Wigan. Have you served a mission?
Mm-hmm.
Did you receive a ministerial certificate?
Yes, I did.
Well, when we were set apart, it was a fairly impressive document with fake leather binding and a big thing, signature of the president of the church. To all to whom these presents shall come, this is to certify that, etc., etc., etc. And we were instructed to carry this with us at all times. For 2 years, dutifully, I carried that ministerial certificate in my inside jacket pocket. Never once took it out. Never took it out. I was in Ireland. I was within 3 weeks of the end of my mission, knocking on this door, giving my spiel to this woman, and she was looking at me with a jaundiced eye. And finally I said, "There's something wrong, ma'am?" She said, "You're a minister?" I said, "Yes." "You're mighty young to be a minister." I thought, I said, reached in, pulled it out for the first time and handed it to her. She opened it up and started reading. Her eyes got big, and she said, "You're it," and she threw it out into the street. I've still got water stains where it fell in the gutter, kind of thing like this. I said, I'm what? She said, "You're the beast," and she slammed the door in my face. I wondered what that was about, so I walked up, picked up the certificate, looked at it for the first time, really seriously looked at it. Now, let me interrupt it for just a moment. I assume the first missionary called on January 1st, stamped on his certificate was a big blue number 1.
Number 1.
Number 2,
Oh no.
number 3, number 4. I was called in March. My number 666.
Serious? Oh, you're kidding.
So, if nothing else develops from this night, you can go home and say, "You have met the beast." He's a Mormon.
He's a Mormon. He's
He's
an
a
Oregon.
pretty decent guy.
Oh my!
Yeah, 666.
That is
bright blue.
hilarious.
That's funny.
That's
I
funny.
quietly tucked it away and never showed
Not
it.
gonna pull that out again. That's
Well,
funny.
one of his journal entries when he first met you, and he was excited. He thought you were a great guy, and Elder Huxford is a fine elder, and I will love working with him. One of the first things you do is he had to go register with the police, and then he said he registered with the police, the butcher, and the butcher and the grocer.
Greengrocer, yes. Now remember, everything was
Registered?
rationed. For 2 years I was hungry.
Oh,
Everything was
okay.
very severely rationed. The only thing that got the missionaries through was we could trade our tea ration for extra milk, butter, something. People would sell their kids for an extra tea ration. So we'd do some bartering around like that, but it was very severe. And when you registered at the post office at a window, above the window, "Dogs, cats, aliens registered here." I always thought that was an interesting commentary. Dogs, cats, and aliens.
We're up there with the dog.
And you registered whenever you changed location, and also at the expiration of a year and a half, so forth and so on, periodic intervals like that.
Now, also, all the pictures that we see of him in the mission field, he's wearing a hat. That
We
was
wore hats.
required, correct?
We wore hats in those days, and we wore colored shirts in those days. There was no official uniform. in those days. Forgive me if I get rather heated under the collar here. The only way you can tell general authorities apart is by the color of their tie.
Right.
Their dress in uniform. Anyway,
I wear a blue shirt, see what happens.
sometimes they grew mustaches, not beards, but they wanted you to look older. You know, you go back to the late 1800s, early 1900s, and their frock coats and their beards and things like that. These were young men that you wanted to look older. But the one thing we had then that we don't have nowadays. Otherwise, the mission field now is much more strict than it was back in those days. We pretty well ran our own show. We saw the mission president twice a year.
Did you now, let me ask you about that. It looks like the mission president's name was Richards. And so he would have been in London, is that where the mission home was?
149 Nightingale Lane. Let me tell you
Okay, that's a memory.
Now, please remember that the church, I don't know, but the church probably only had about 30 missions in the entire world. Most of those in the United States, kind of thing like this. The British mission was the oldest overseas mission that we had. So almost invariably, the British mission had a general authority as president, or soon to be general authority. When we arrived there, Elder Rockwood and myself, was Stainer Richards. His brother, by the way, was the mission president of the Northwestern States Mission, Portland, where I was from.
He was the grandson of Willard Richards.
I don't know what the relation, but he's part of that Richards family. I must tell you about my introduction to him. He was nobody's favorite uncle. Now remember, and I can't recreate.
I remember that.
I can't.
I can kind of see that Eileen and you were from the same
Dark. Dark.
We're going to get the straight dope here.
Yeah,
That's
you are.
Dark and dank and hot. No heat in the buildings. This was post-war, immediate post-war England. And we landed at Southampton, we went by boat then. We landed at Southampton, took the train up to London, we brought to Nightingale Lane, walked in this large, very dimly lit baronial mansion kind of thing like this. Secretary of the office out here, inner office in there. There were four of us. Reporting, we are elder so-and-so and so-and-so. Reporting, oh yes, just a moment. She goes to the door, opens the door, comes back out. You may go in now, we go in. President Richards is sitting behind the desk, a little reading lamp beside him, working on something, writing stuff out. He didn't even look up. We stand there shifting from foot to foot, you know, kind of thing. Here we've been celebrated, you know, like warriors going off to battle, what wonderful people we were, you know, oh, we thought we were the king. And here the mission president, totally ignoring us. And then finally he gets through with whatever he's doing and lays it aside and takes his glasses off and lays them down here, sits back and folds his hands across his stomach and says, "Brethren, missionaries have come here in times past for 2 years of vacation, travel, whatever they wanted to make of it. I want you to understand that I expect from you not 8 hours, not 10 hours, not 12 hours, but every waking moment of your day will be devoted to missionary work. Now, if you want to meet those conditions, I want to welcome you to the British mission." Shook our hands, but he let us know. Well, what had happened prior to that time? We have glorious stories of missionary work in the early days. Frankly, it was abysmal. The missionary, you go back and read the journals of the 1920s, 1930s, they spent the majority of the time visiting already members of the church, eating with them, preparing their Sunday sermons. They did relatively little proselyting, kind of thing like this. Well, Elder President Richards had, I mentioned to you, his brother was the president of the Northwestern States Mission, and the Northwestern States Mission missionary named Richard Anderson, a name that you might know, had developed the Anderson Plan, which was the first systematic presentation of the gospel. And Stainer Richards brought that to England and adopted it to the British mission. Well, he was introducing a standardized plan, 16 hours a day. It took 325 memorized scriptures to work the Anderson plan, and he expected you to know that. And trying to impose this on a group of missionaries who had goofed off. Well, you can imagine the pushback from that. So his approach was, every missionary came in and he was going to burn their rear ends out. And they were to understand from day one what was expected of them, kind of thing like that. I can tell you other stories. Let me tell you one story. He was hard-nosed. We never got cozy with him, but he was a good mission president.
While you do that, let me just set the stage. In what I was able to find on the internet, he was actually the stake president of Dad's stake, the Highland Park stake in Salt Lake, before he served as the mission president. So he had to have known Dad somehow in that beforehand. But Dad, I haven't found anything in the writing that I've read so far where he talks about his mission president. So I just absolutely love that.
Well, I don't think I'll go on and tell the story.
No.
It's a funny story. But
No, go ahead.
well, here's this stern guy kind of thing. You just don't play games with him kind of thing. We had two missionaries in our district, Elder Puffer and Elder Albrand. Puffer and Albrand. And of course, they became the breakfast cereal. Elder Puffer was small town Idaho, as green as you can possibly imagine. Albrand was Los Angeles, streetwise, and these two put together, and Elder Albrand was always just, I mean, Elder Puffer, he would do anything. And we used to, if we didn't have bicycles, you'd ride the public transportation. And you pay your threepence. I love that word, threepence, 8 and 8. And they crank out a little paper ticket like this.
Oh, just.
And anyway,
like
Elder Albrand told Elder Puffer, save those, because the mission reimburses you 50% for all your travel expenses. So, 6 months, well, several months have passed. We have our district conference. Elder Richards is there. And here comes Elder Puffer. We have a series of meetings all day long. He's carrying this shoebox full of receipts. You can see where this is leading. Anyway, at the end, we're having a wrapping up session, and President Richards is saying, now, any questions? And Elder Puffer raises his hand and says, yes, sir. And he hands him the box. He opens the box, and literally, the tickets just bounce out. And he said, well, I kept a total, and I would like my reimbursement. And definitely Paul hangs over all of us. So all of us are in on the joke. And now we thought the crap was going to hit the family.
That's really sad.
And President Richards said, Elder Puffer, I'm sorry to tell you this, but we have actually had elders that have just picked up these tickets off the ground and brought them for reimbursement. So it's a sad commentary on the missionary stuff. What you have to do now is go back to the conductors that gave you these tickets and have them initiate them, kind of thing. Like, well, after it was over with, we introduced Elder Puffer and joke kind of thing. But we all thought, otherwise we would have been doing missionary duty in Iceland. But he went along with the joke, and that humanized him.
Well, I almost hate to say this after you talked about how the mission president wanted everybody to work 24 hours a day. Couple things. As impressed as I am with all of your street meetings, and maybe, in fact, before I go any further, tell me how you actually did these street meetings.
When I use the term street meeting now, it doesn't mean the same. It doesn't mean street tracking.
Okay.
Now, no, this means you go down to the public square, set up a stand. If it's just a chair, you stand on it and take your hat off and say, Friends of Wigan, my companion and I are missionaries of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, the Mormon Church. And you shout that out as loud as you can. They didn't know the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints was. They knew Mormons. And then you'd start your preachment. You generally beforehand design what the program was going to be. Often it was on Joseph Smith, restoration, authority, Godhead, things like this. Because if you let the presentation slip out of hand, if you let the crowd talk take over, you're finished. Anyway, what you do is stand there and shout. Now, very little in the way of convert baptisms ever came out of street meetings, but it sure converted a lot of missionaries. when you're there shouting out your testimony of
Right.
the gospel and hearing it bounce off all those empty buildings out there and coming back to you. If you don't believe Joseph Smith is a prophet of God before you get up there, you darn well better by the time you get down, because you've heard your own voice shouting it out in many ways. But I must tell you, I'm sorry. Am I talking too much?
No,
No,
this
not
is-
at all. We're fascinated.
There's just Kathy and ourselves, and we get tired of talking to each other. We've heard all our stories over and over again. As I mentioned to you, this was during the Korean conflict, and you may or may not be aware that the church entered into a relationship with the Selective Service, the draft board, that allowed each unit of the church to send one missionary per year. This is why a number of your dad and my generation, there were several missions. And this is why you have a lot of married young men and a lot of older men.
Oh, that makes sense.
In the
Okay.
mission field then. When I got to Ireland, we had 16 missionaries there. When I left, we had 6. Okay, so among these retreads, these old 70s, this is when you had local 70s, was an elder Daniel Beck from Gunnison, Utah. He seemed ancient to me then, but he could have only been 65, 70 years old. Cattle rancher in Gunnison. He came to us. This actually happened in Belfast after I left Liverpool and gone to Ireland. He just arrived and been with us for about a week, and I said, Elder Beck, we're going to have a street meeting this afternoon. We held the street meetings in Belfast down at the Custom House steps, which was on the waterfront. Tough area. And he said, oh good, I've always wanted to see a street meeting. Not only will you see a street meeting, Elder Beck, you will be in the street. No, I can't. I didn't want burning, didn't bothering anymore. So we went down there, 3 or 4 of the missionaries, some of the people from the branch, and we set up our stands. I was the district president. Friends of Belfast, my companions are and I give my spiel, talking about Joseph Smith probably, another missionary, and finally I said, friends of Belfast, we have a special treat for you. Elder Daniel Beck is just fresh off the boat. This is his first time in Belfast in the street meeting. I know all of you are going to be very kind and considerate to him. Now, if you would like to just step in here, well, they were already shoulder to shoulder as far as you could see the crowd out there. And Elder Beck, he stands up there. We wore hats. And he was crunching his hat. I remember. Well, as I mentioned to you, you try to stick to a very precise script and simple basics. Elder Beck got up there. He covered everything from pre-existence to 3 degrees of glory and so forth and so on. And after 40 minutes, he was still going on. And he was talking about the resurrection. And he said, brothers and sisters, he's talking to a crowd in Belfast, calling them brothers and sisters. And in Catholic Belfast, that means something. Kind of thing like that. Can you imagine your sons, your daughters coming forth out of the grave, having heard the gospel of Jesus Christ, which we are preaching to you, and saying to you, why didn't you tell us about this marvelous thing? And Elder Beck had an asthmatic condition. When he got excited, his eyes watered, his nose watered, he has his handkerchief out, he's wiping his eyes, he's wiping his nose, and talking about resurrection. Big old longshoreman beside me, big burly guy, as he's checking each other. This is the greatest thing I've ever heard. Well, if they see the asthma, you know, boy, it was far. Anyway, we went home that night, and Elder Beck was fired up. When were we going again? And from that time on, we started our missionaries, and they say, sit down, Elder, we want to hear Elder Beck. Where's Elder Beck? We went to bed one night, and this is about his 2nd or 3rd mission. I think, frankly, he left on his mission because he didn't like his wife very much.
Oh.
And this is a way of getting away from her. Elder Beck turned to me and he said, you know, Elder, in 4 weeks we have accomplished more than I have in 2 years
Wow.
on my previous mission. But the weather was just too severe for him, and he was pulled out of Ireland and transferred down to the south. I lost track of him. I don't know. what eventually happened.
When you talked about the mission president, you didn't see him very much, but when Dad got his call and somehow he still had, of all the calls, the one he has in the writing of the district president was his call to go to Wigan and serve with you. And it was signed by J. Marlowe Taylor. So he was the district president.
Yes.
Would he have been a local or a missionary?
No, he was a missionary, elder and sister. I haven't heard that name for 60 years, and his wife's name was Ida. So I remember they were an elderly couple. Sister Taylor tried to mother us and failed miserably. I mean, be sure to keep your galoshes on when you go out. Oh, come on. And I assume when they went home, then Elder Rockwood was made.
Okay, all right. Well, that makes sense to me then, because when I tried to look him up, I found a reference on the internet where he had served in the British mission in 1904 as a young man.
Yeah.
So that would make him old enough to be about the age that you say.
Yeah.
So that's got to be the same
He
guy.
was the district president.
All right. So if you don't mind me asking a few house cleaning things, when Dad moved in with you, one of the first things he said he did was go replace the mattress. He wasn't getting any sleep, so you guys went and got a new mattress somewhere. He didn't sleep very well the first night, and then he also talked about how excited he was to get a new stove while he was with you. So you can, I mean, it was just interesting stuff. But he talks a lot about how he had to go to different branches. So I would guess that not all branches had missionaries, or was there a reason for you guys to go on divisions or splits quite often? Because it seemed like he was always on a bus going here or going there and not all the time with you.
Right, there's another difference between missionary work now and then. No, every city that had a branch had missionaries in that branch. Every city.
Okay.
Now I think he's talking about there, we were circuited, and that was the word, we were circuited out on Sundays to preach in these various.
To mix it up.
And sometimes we went as pairs, but more often we were on our own.
Okay.
So Elder Rockwood would be assigned to Liverpool, I'd be assigned to Accrington or something like that. That's probably what he's talking about.
All right. Another thing he talks a lot about is at this time, and Perry, you'd appreciate this, one of their missionary tools was they joined a basketball league. And I've got a clipping.
We did that in my mission.
Did they?
Yeah.
And I've got a clipping where that he cut out from the newspaper that talked about specifically their team, and what it was cool. It said, good news for basketball enthusiasts is that the American missionaries of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints have decided to play in the Merseyside League. Merseyside, and their inclusion will now make the A division into 8 teams, and it talks about how, and so Dad talks about these games, and I guess most of them were on Saturdays, at least what I can see here, but you guys didn't see too much competition, at least what he writes here, 100 to 38. And
That'd be the score?
yeah, and then this friend of his that Dad stayed a good friend with, O'Don Osler, he ended up being the CEO of OC Tanner in Salt Lake. But I guess he was a real hotshot guard and would shoot from outside and pretty well. But he always constantly wrote how many points they each had and how it was hard to find much competition over in England.
That would have happened after I left, because we
Okay.
had no basketball team.
No basketball?
When I was there. There was one in Ireland, when I went to Ireland.
Oh, there was.
Yeah. I
Okay.
remember we were playing an Air Force team over in Ireland. And of course, they played the national anthems before the games. And one of the missionaries said, listen, they're playing My Country 'Tis of Thee. No, it's God Save the King. No. He thought they were playing.
Yeah.
He talks a lot about tea. Can you just give me an idea on you'd eat breakfast as a companionship, and then was the big meal in the middle of the day, or how, and where did tea fit in?
It's pretty uniform throughout England, and maybe the entire British Isles, high tea. You've heard of high tea. You have breakfast, you have lunch, and then about 4 o'clock in the afternoon, you have a high tea, which consists of, for the English, tea, bread, jams, jellies, pickles, nothing cooked. And then you have your dinner, and this is uniform throughout Europe. You have your dinner quite late in the evening, 7 or 8 o'clock, kind of thing like that. So I'm assuming that's what he means by tea.
Was the big meal for lunch, or was it still dinner was the big meal?
Dinner is still in the evening.
And things were later. I had a number of times, you guys got in at 10 or 11, and if you had visiting elders, they'd stay up till 2 or 3.
I don't know about that.
I thought it was kind of,
Elder Rockwood.
he might have.
Yeah.
Sounds like it.
Okay, so you just kind of made the rounds, because that makes more sense. One of the things I gotta read you here on, let me see if I can find this. I have it here. The day that he got transferred, was it he, or no, you had already been there, so you must have moved out on December 10th. Let me find that real quick. Oh yeah, here it is. Elder, let me find it. Gosh, I wanted to read this because I just loved it.
He did a much better job than I did. I came back after 2 years and I was on page 32.
Yeah, I wasn't good either.
And is that the second journal, or is that the other one? Is there 2 of them?
No, I think there was only one. Okay, just to give you an idea, this was Saturday. Okay, this is Sunday. The day Sunday. This would have been Sunday, December 9th. Yeah, December 9th, Sunday. It was a terrible day today with winds and rain plus snow. Our breakfast consisted of toast and cornflakes. Ollie, which was this Odon Osler, and I caught the bus to Charlie, and then I went on to something, Arlington or something along. I spent a very enjoyable day there and had a nice tea with the Vernons. They certainly are a fine family. I talked on prayer and sacrament service, and it went over pretty good. I arrived back home around 9, and Elder H. was a little down in the dumps about having to leave Wigan. They surely love him here, and I can see why, so he said. And the very next day, so Elder H is gone, and he got Elder Aiken as a replacement. But one of the things that he said a number of times, how he thought the members there really liked you. And I also think that surprised me a little bit. My dad, he didn't say a lot about it, but I guess he got hooked into being in a school play his senior year at South High in Salt Lake. And many times, evidently, he sang in church, and when he was your companion, he was actually in charge. You guys were having musical practices for some conference that you were going to sing at, and he talks about how they're great young men, but I just don't think we're going to pull it together. And then finally, I don't know how much later you guys actually had the conference, and he was very, very
That would have been after I left.
impressed with how you guys pulled it all out.
That would have been after I left. I don't recall that at all. But this Elder Love that I mentioned to you, who he replaced, had a beautiful voice and would frequently sing solos in church, and on occasion we'd sing duets. So Elder Rockwood, I don't remember hearing him sing, so obviously, evidently he could sing. which was good because he was taking the place of the missionary who
That had a great voice. One of the things that too, and I don't know if this was right when he was with you or after, but every once in a while you guys would go to a movie. Yeah. And he would write which movie they went to see, and generally it was always a great flick. He kept calling them flicks, and yeah, it was a great flick, great flick. Until one, they went and saw, and I guess it was the Disney version, it was Alice in Wonderland. But he put, and it stunk. That's what he put.
Yeah.
Barry, we were just talking about Alice in Wonderland, and he said he's never seen it. I'm like, you've never seen that? How could that be?
Well, Grandpa True didn't think much of it.
The rules were substantially different. Again, we were left much more on our own. I'm sure there were consequences of that weren't too good. That's why they straightened up the rules. And I don't want you to hear this, young man. But I would like to think that we were more responsible in those days. That we were more used to being on our own. But we didn't have much contact with mission headquarters at all. I sometimes shudder when I reflect back on both Elder Rockwood and myself, the district presidents, and I reflect back on some of the things that I did. I don't know whether they're church policy or not, but somehow the church didn't crumble as a result of it. But we sort of, over in Ireland especially, since we were a separate entity, an island off to ourselves, we sort of developed an in-group feeling, sort of us against the world. This is our show.
Right.
Everybody man the oars, pull together. For instance, all of our sons have served missions, and uniformly they reported back on problem companions. I cannot remember, I did not experience a single missionary companion that would not work. Now, there were some cases that I liked, some were not like others. I liked Elder Rockwood very much. There were some that weren't my bosom buddies, but I could never fault them in terms of work, kind of thing like this. And I simply could not fathom, when our sons were writing to us, kids that wouldn't get out of bed in the morning. Or they'd leave, walk out the door, walk around the corner, and suddenly the missionary companion's gone somewhere. Or cavorting around with the women. I'm sure we have had that condition, but I didn't see it.
Can you tell me a little bit about the particular apartment there in Wigan? He talks about the day he was there. He said, I caught the bus to Wigan, walked up to the chapel, and got settled in my new home. Were you close to the chapel?
This is one point where my memory, we were on Gidlow Lane. When I got there, my older love and I rented an upstairs room from Mrs. G, an Irish Catholic landlady.
Okay.
And we lived there, but while we were there, the church bought. We had rented facilities downtown. But the church bought this stately mansion just about 3 blocks right down Gidlow Lane from where digs, they called them digs, were. And I can't remember whether Elder Rockwood and I continued in 363 Gidlow Lane with Mrs. G, or whether the missionaries moved down and took some of the upstairs rooms.
Well, one of the things he said you did do when he was there was they moved from downstairs to upstairs while he was there.
That would have been the chapel.
Okay.
That we bought.
All right.
I must tell you a story about Mrs. G. Number one, the Catholic priest came to her and said, "You have more missionaries in your home. That doesn't look good. We would like you to move them out." And she said, "They are more welcome here than you are." The second thing, she was always scolding us. My companion and I bought a bicycle, a tandem bicycle.
No fun.
And we'd go we were always late for meetings. We'd go rocketing through that town. We put 400 pounds of missionaries on this 150-pound bicycle and get up speed. I mean, you're moving. And we'd come home at night, she said, "Mrs. Stewart down the road said she saw you racing through town. You're going to kill yourselves. I'm going to have to write to your folks and tell them you're dead." The only time the only day of missionary work that I missed because of ill health. I was just absolute. As it turned out, I was having an attack of appendicitis.
Oh, no.
And I was flat on my back in bed. Anything like that, just out of it. Woke up to see my Irish Catholic landlady kneeling by my bedside with her rosary beads.
Really?
Reciting the rosary. I would have had a witch doctor doing hoodoo over me the way I was seeing that. An Irish Catholic landlady
Isn't that
reciting
funny?
rosary.
Oh, my God.
Well, I did a search on the internet and found where the church building is now in Wigan, and it's on Wigan Lane. But what's interesting, and that's the church, but what's interesting is when I took the street view and went around this corner, and I don't know the name of that street, when you look back at this two-story house, it still said it was the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. So even though the fence around the new building stops and there's another one there, I'm wondering if by chance the church owns that piece of property. And that's not what you're thinking of, is it? The home that, you said the church actually bought?
Yes.
Or-
Yes, it bought this building. It was a very impressive building, by the way. One of the nicest homes in Wigan. I'm just wondering if they
I'm wondering if that's it.
remodeled it and used it as part of the new building. Oh, people.
So anyway, I'll have to look that up. I'll leave that for you, but I'll have to look that up. That's
Oh,
interesting.
so thank you for that.
Because I thought, he talked about I just, that sounded so close, so I wondered if that's what it was.
By the way, Wigan was known for rugby and not for soccer.
Right. And you know, I also, at least whether it's true or not, in Wikipedia it says that if you're from Wigan, you're called a pie eater. And evidently, that goes back to there was a time when the coal miners either went on strike or something, and the owners of the mines or whatever played their bluff and so the miners had to come back and eat humble pie. And so they called them, ever since then, people from Wigan, they called them pie eaters. And since, I think, the mid-90s, they've had the World Pie Eating Championship in Wigan.
Wigan doesn't have much fun. I mentioned to you that's in Lancashire. An old Lancashire man, and then right
And
next,
Lancashire would be a county, correct?
equivalent
And so-
of a county,
right,
and right next to it is Yorkshire. And Yorkshire has even a more pronounced dialect than Lancashire. You get an old Yorkshireman and an old Lancashireman. Well, you know the history of England, House of Lancaster, House of York, the War of the Roses, things like that. And I can't do dialects and so forth. But there's a whole series of poems about Mr. and Mrs. Ramsbottom and their young son Albert. And one of them starts off, there's a famous seasort resort called Blackpool. It's noted for fresh air and fun. Blackpool. We have a branch there, by the way. It's the lagoon
Okay.
resort area for famous around all England. Noted for fresh air and fun, where Mr. and Mrs. Ramsbottom went with Albert, their young son. It's a story of this family, and then Albert dressed up in his new suit with his horses and little cane. Anyway, they pay their money, they go into the zoo, basically, and this what they see there. And one of them, they got a lion in a cage. And Albert is poking the lion through the cage. And the lion somehow or other eats Albert.
A pleasant story.
And so of course, Mr. and Mrs. Ramsbottom go to the man in charge of the zoo, and the dialogue is hilarious, and they do it in this very thick Yorkshire accent. And Mrs. Ramsbottom said, yon lions et our Albert, I'm vexed.
I'm vexed.
I'm vexed.
I'm vexed. Okay.
You said, well, she's vexed, and the thing she's protesting is they paid 3 admissions to get in here. Albert has been eaten. They want a refund on his ticket. Anyway, on and Then there's a follow-up poem. Evidently the lion regurgitates or whatever. Albert's back again. Meanwhile, they have been reimbursed by the National Health Service for the loss of their son, funeral expenses paid and all that. And then Albert shows up again. So they decided to take him to the zoo. See if they can get rid of him. Second time. And all of this is done in this rich Yorkshire dialect. It's just funny for us.
Well, and you said you were cold most of the time. He does talk a lot about the cold, and you said you didn't eat very well. It looks like he normally tells in his journal what he ate that day, and I don't know what he considered steak, but he says steak and potatoes quite often. And then it seemed like people served you potato salad with all the trimmings, he says a number of times. I don't know what potato salad would be with all the trimmings.
I don't think he ate steak, as we understand.
Yeah, I was going to say.
What he's probably refers to is steak and kidney pie, which, by the way, I developed a real taste for.
Really?
That was good stuff. But meat was in very short supply, and what they served as meat was usually a sausage, which was a little bit of meat ground up with wheat, bread, flour, kinds of things like this too.
That makes sense.
We were eating shark, we were eating kangaroo, we were eating anything that you could put through a grinder and stuff in a sausage. Things like this. I remember I'd been there about 4 months. Wigan is near Burtonwood Air Force Base, which is near Manchester. Burtonwood Air Force Base was an American Air Force facility. And there was a sergeant there, an LDS fellow, not married, was heading home, and he approached my companion over Love and I and said, would you like to come out on the base and have a little farewell dinner with me? So, yeah, so he took us to the NCO club, sat us down and said, how would you like your steaks? Milkshakes, steaks, potatoes, and stuff like this. Now, remember rationing, and suddenly I begin to have pictures of prisoners of war and concentration camp people behind those fences, lean, emaciated.
Oh, yeah.
How inside that cyclone fence were these Americans living the best of lives, and outside that fence people were for 15 years. Had not seen anything like that. Anyway, we had our meal. By the way, our waiter was a Polish physician that was still looking for his family. Now, 6 years after the end of the war, serving tables in the American Air Force Base. How many hundreds of thousands of displaced people were still wandering the map of Europe at that time. Anyway, he took us over to the PX and said, choose your candy. We went down there at Hershey bars, Mars bars, and I looked around and the guys on the base were laughing at us, and I thought, yeah, we look like those refugees beyond the wall. Here we are, hands up on the counter, eyes wide like this. He bought us a box of Hershey bars, and it was almost, and Elder Rockwood probably participated in this. Each night before we go to bed, we'd break off one square of Hershey bar, and it was like the priest or ministry. Put it on our tongue and just let it melt. Bless you, my son.
Terrific.
You learned a very much different set of values when you are bereft of things that you take for granted.
Thank you so much. This is
incredible. Bless your heart.
This little Christmas tree, this Millennial Star. Now, the Millennial Star, wasn't that one of the first
Well, if you look at that, this is
magazines or publications of the church? But it looks like it's more focused to missionaries by the time you got there. Is that correct, or did it go to all members?
It went to all members.
It did.
Yeah, 1952, and this is volume 114. So subtract 114 from 1952, 1937, 1938. The oldest continual publication of the church ever had. I think it's been discontinued now. It has been for a number of
There's
years.
even an article in that one about the latest in Book of Mormon archaeology. Even back then. That's great. So anyway, you left and you went up to Ireland. Did you stay there most of the rest of your mission? I had a brother, I gotta just tell you, I have a brother who served in Edinburgh, Scotland. And there's 5 of us, and my oldest brother went to Bangkok, Thailand, and I went to the ghettos of Philadelphia, Spanish speaking. I had a brother that went to Cordoba, Argentina, a brother that went to the Black Hills of Kentucky, and then this son that went to Edinburgh, Scotland, and my parents were so excited that he was going back to the British Islands anyway, and we all thought he was my dad's favorite anyway, so it just fit in. But of all the places we went, all of us went, and my mom was so happy that he got sent there because she felt like he was finally going somewhere safe. And he had more troubles on his mission as far as safety than any of us.
As far as what?
Safety.
He was attacked and...
They had a lot of problems with the pubs, the guys coming out of the pubs that would see these Americans, and it's like everybody wanted to pick a fight with them all the time.
And that's a fair, not a recent phenomenon. That didn't occur when we were there necessarily. I think.
This would have been in the 80s.
Yeah,
He was
in the 80s.
Yeah, I've heard that. Before. I must. I must tell you, Edinburgh is my favorite city in the British Isles.
Is it?
It's a gorgeous city. Gorgeous is the wrong word to say. Beautiful. It's Georgian England and medieval Scotland. And the 2 parts of the city you know definitely when you walk from one to the other, kind of thing like this. I like bagpipe music. Anyway, I Scotland. President McKay is Scotland. And, he came over to Scotland to dedicate 2 chapels and invited us Irish missionaries over. So we had the great thrill of sailing on Loch Lomond with President Mackay. His name is
really?
Mackay in Scotland.
Oh, interesting.
And all of us trying to ingratiate ourselves, come to the attention of the prophet. He spent all the time on the fantail of the boat reciting Robert Burns' poetry to the boatman, who didn't know who he was, just in his element, President McKay, in his element. I've got to tell you, President Mackay story, and then we'll end it. We're taking too much very valuable time, and we have pie.
Wiggins pie?
Yeah.
Any kind of meat just great.
The mission home used to be in downtown Salt Lake, and it was just 2 great big apartment buildings and so forth and so on. My group was one of the last of the large groups before the draft began to close in. So they couldn't house all of us in the mission home, so they asked if any of us had relatives in the Salt Lake area if we could stay with them. I had a grandmother, so I stayed with my grandmother, arranged with another missionary to pick me up and give me a car. We would drive in, parking lot in the back of where the old church office building is now. It used to be all open area back there. Anyway, he arrived late. We zipped down there, drove in, drove around, couldn't find a parking spot back there. Finally found one spot right in back of the church office building, went wheeling in, but it had a label, President David Boyd McKay. This is his parking spot. So I thought, well, we'll park here, go to our class, during the break, come out, move the car, which we did, came out, and there was the biggest, blackest Buick, I think it was, sitting there, motor running, President McKay, you couldn't miss him, remember?
Yeah, oh
Right
yeah.
there.
Oh, handsome, big man, talking to somebody else. Here is the, he was second counselor, and here is the counselor in the presidency, but you're a young kid from Portland, Oregon. You know, I peed my pants. People like this. And so we were trying to sort of edge by without being noticed and possible. So President McKay ends his conversation turns and greets us and so forth and so on. Are you 2 missionaries? Yes, we are. We didn't go into genuflect. Yes, he's yes. Where are you going? British mission. My old mission. He said, say, if you ever get up to Scotland. I said, I'm thinking about this. Thurso, Scotland. Drop in and see Mrs. McDougall. Well, of course, she's probably dead by now and so forth and so on. But I envy you, that great mission, great mission. Meanwhile, we're sweating beavies waiting for the sheep to drop. Finally, he says, is that your car? Yes, sir. I was sure I was going to go home saying it was the happiest 3 days of my life.
Right.
The whole church had ground to a halt, kind of thing like this. And my companions started explaining, oh, we were late, we couldn't find anything. He said, don't fuss it. He said, I'd have done the same thing. But I tell you what, next time you're late, why don't you park in President Clark's spot?
Oh, that's hilarious.
But what a gentle way.
That is so
We would
funny.
never do it again, worlds without end, but rather than humiliating us, it makes it go. Park in President
Clark's spot.
Did you ever get a chance to read the biography that his sons wrote? That's David L. McKay and the Rise of Modern Mormonism.
Yes.
Fascinating. But he talked a little bit about how church security used to call the police in Ogden Canyon and say he's left, because I guess he was a leadfoot and just left. So when he would go up to his, what was the
Huntsville?
Huntsville, yeah.
On the weekends or something, they would literally close Ogden Canyon
Close
down
Ogden.
and let him just
Just booking up through there. Oh my
buzz through
God.
there. But that was the book, the first time I had read, where President, of course, he was embarrassed at the church's own property in the British Isles. And he was the one that really felt like, if we want important and classy people to join the church, we've got to have something
So, yeah.
that they would feel comfortable with. And it's neat how the Lord uses people in the right time, because a lot of people would have thought that the church would have gone bankrupt if he had been the prophet much more than he had. And yet, then comes in President Tanner, who it was already there, so it needed to be there. But then President Tanner came in and learned how to manage it once it was there.
When the history of the church in the latter half of the 20th century is written, a definitive history, two people will emerge dominant. And I don't think it'll be any of the prophets necessarily. And Eldon Tanner and Hinckley.
Yeah,
Those
interesting.
two, we fail to realize that the last years of a whole string of prophets, going clear back to Heber J. Graham, George Albert Smith was never healthy. Brief administration, never healthy. President McKay was very ill. My older kids grew up never having seen the prophet in person. They thought they did because they saw pictures all over the place. And then, of course, the succeeding presidents were ill very much in their administration. Tanner was the one who basically rebuilt